Hi, my name is Katherine McGregor, and today I'm sharing with you my paper about the language of the arts, facilitating language comprehension in English language learners. Note, on screen there's an image of students painting. The problem. As a population of multilingual students in Canada increases, there has been a call for more research examining aspects of learning beyond the text-based instructional methodologies, specific cognitive strategies, and curricular choices for young linguistically diverse learners. The research that has been done seemed to focus on how to utilize artistic practices when teaching multilingual students. However, there is a lack of research reviewing how the arts impact language acquisition. Further research is required to identify its impacts and the challenges and barriers teachers face in implementing arts integration with their multilingual students. Within the context of my research, English language learners, or ELLs, was defined as any student who did not speak English as their first language. They may also be born in a country, community, or family that does not speak English as their primary language, or speak a dialect of English that is significantly different from the language of instruction. Accordingly, my study sought to identify how elementary teachers facilitate the language acquisition of ELLs through the integration of the arts. Specifically, I examined the arts-based pedagogies that educators use in the teaching of ELL students, how teachers assess the arts' impact on language acquisition, and the supports needed to effectively teach ELL students. Reviewing these issues from the perspectives of current educators provided significant insight into the observed positive and negative impacts of using the arts in the teaching of ELL students, as well as identified commonalities in perceived best practices. Note on screen there are two images of students, one holding a guitar and one holding a camera. My selection criteria involved all of my teachers being certified by OCT, so the Ontario College of Teachers. They also all had a minimum of 5 years full-time or long-term teaching experience in elementary schools. They also had to have experience teaching a minimum of 10 English language learners in either ELL contained or integrated classrooms. And finally, each participant needed to have integrated one or more of the arts into their teaching. So that was music, drama, dance, and or visual arts. My participants, I had 3 participants, all of whom were actually currently teaching at the same elementary school. The first was Louise Sutton, who was teaching for 22 years. They have an MEd and hold AQs in PJ Part 1, Reading Part 1, and FSL Part 1. They also run arts-based programs for students and do presentations on arts integration for other educators. They have a professional and recreational background in the arts, particularly music, drama, and dance. My second participant was Michelle Lawrence. They were teaching for 14 years. They have a BEd and hold AQs in Primary Education 1 and 2, and Specialist ESL Part 1 and 2, and Specialist and Librarianship Part 1 and 2. They have no formal background in the arts. And finally, I have Susan Day, who is teaching for 14 years as well. They have AQs in Intermediate and Senior Divisions French, ESL Part 1, Spec Ed Part 1, and Principals Qualifications Part 1 and 2. They run programs on mindfulness for ELL and refugee students, and they have a background in the arts, but it's an informal setting, particularly in music. My findings. So I had 3 main findings for my research. The first was the value of arts integration. So the arts have long been an undervalued subject in the Ontario curriculum, despite the numerous studies highlighting its social, emotional, and academic benefits. Despite there not being a big emphasis placed on them from the government, teachers still have the ability to highlight the arts in the classroom. So why is it not happening? Well, it seems the biggest reason is they don't feel comfortable teaching them or qualified to teach them. Maybe they fell into the trap of believing you're either artistic or you're not, or maybe they feel they need to have a background in the arts. Either way, this is simply not true. All 3 of my participants had integrated arts into their classroom, and each of them had a different level of experience and background in the arts. According to all three participants, one of the benefits of integrating the arts into their teaching was an increase in engagement. And that kind of leads into my second finding, which was using diverse strategies. So Michelle made the point that it could be overwhelming for some ELL students to be taught in like a lecture style. Having the arts activities breaks up learning and helps them to tune back in. And the arts are so versatile that students are able to work at their comfort level. Susan mentioned the flexibility of the materials and how it's important to make sure students know that perfection is not expected. Students are encouraged to try their best and take risks. And Michelle stated that she found students were more likely to take a risk when it came to the arts because it's so subjective and no one work was going to be the same. In this way, there are fewer comparisons made between students. And Michelle and Louise both mentioned how the arts allow students to make personal connections to what they are learning and open up more than they otherwise may have. Learning a new language can be incredibly difficult, especially if someone's a newcomer to an English speaking country. So add in differences in cultural background, lack of representation, and cultural understanding, and it's easy to see why students may become disengaged and start to struggle. In order to develop an effective lesson, the backgrounds of the students need to be considered, and all three educators I interviewed mentioned the importance of considering their students' backgrounds when developing lessons and expectations. In addition to choice, all three participants indicated the importance of using multiple strategies to scaffold the learning for ELLs. And specifically, Michelle stated that when she strictly stuck to arts lessons, that sometimes students had a hard time making connections. So to scaffold them with some of the more quote unquote traditional styles of learning help them to not silo that learning and help them to make those connections. My final theme was that success needs support. And it's no surprise that in order for any student to be successful, they need to be supported. However, what was emphasized in the process of this study was it's not just supporting the students' academics, but also their emotional well being. For instance, Susan mentioned considering how she works with a vulnerable population when planning her lessons, and that first and foremost, her students need to be brought to the here and now. When asked about barriers to providing ELL students with support, there was a common theme that emerged that was there's not enough ELL resource support teachers in schools. And although participants agreed that integrating ELLs into the classroom was beneficial, they stated that classroom teachers needed to be given the proper training to support those students. Note on screen, we see some students talking with each other. The next thing I want to talk to you about is the implications that emerged. And the first was an increase in engagement. So, as mentioned before, the multidisciplinary art strategies provided choices and it prioritized creating a safe classroom where students felt comfortable taking risks, practicing their language skills, and gaining confidence. In addition to this, they were able to use their prior knowledge to support long lasting retention of the new language because it gave students a reference point from which to work from. They were able to make those connections, and the research stated that in order for any language to be long lasting and understood, it needed to have a reference point from which to draw from. And lastly, that training. There was a lack of resources available for ELLs. There's also a lack of training for educators to support them in both the arts and in just ELL learning. So finally, in conclusion, the participants expressed the need for more training, more funding, and more in-person support in order to effectively teach their ELL students. Throughout the process of my research, I discovered that participants' opinions and experiences integrating the arts into their teaching of ELLs aligned with the existing body of research. Although society and institutions currently undervalue the arts, there are vast benefits to this type of learning as it offers opportunities to reinforce and connect their learning to prior knowledge. Further research to investigate strategies and barriers to teaching ELLs through the arts would provide a better understanding of the most effective and culturally responsive teaching pedagogies. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.